We've talked about using floats and document flow, that elements occur on our page in the order that they are listed in the markup. Positioning works in a similar manner in that it's all about the document flow and where elements are going to be on screen. So in this outstanding article from A List Apart, we can see that they have lots of information on positioning. Now, when we move into positioning, we have a couple of different properties that we're able to set. The first of those is static. Now, static and relative behave about the same. And if we do nothing to the elements in our markup, if we don't do any positioning, they behave as if they have static or relative applied to them. Static we can't do anything to. Once we say something is static, that's it. But with relative, we can start to do a few more things with it. So when we look at static, there's three divs. They show up in the order that they were on screen. So if we look at the content, we have these three divs, and they are now appearing in the order that is being specified by the markup. Box 1, box 2, box 3. We can see box 1 is getting red, box 2 is getting blue, box 3 is getting green. So we get red, blue, green showing up on our screen. So with that, not too spectacular, nothing too fancy. It's just the order of the markup. Now, if we position everything as relative, it looks the same. So with that, they're going to be about the same, except that when something is positioned relative, we are able to offset its position relative to its parent. When something is static, we are not allowed to specify left, right, top, or bottom properties. What the box is what the box is. If we want to change it, too bad. But with relative, that's where the fun starts. So now if I move over to example C, we'll see that it's the same three boxes. But looking in their styles, we'll see that box 2 has had its left margin set to 200. And the boxes are 200 pixels wide, therefore it creates the checkerboard pattern. Between static we can't position. Relative means we can now position an element relative to the previous positioned parent. And that's going to be a key construct there. Previous positioned element. So that may be what came before it in the markup. It may be the body tag. So it's common as part of building your stock markup and stock CSS that along with zeroing everything out, we throw a position relative on the body tag. Because once the body has been positioned, then we can start positioning other elements relative to that. If we put an element inside of an element, we will see how box 2 is inside of box 1. Box 2 has the left position applied to it again. But because box 2 is inside of box 1, it has now moved its position over. So if I were to put a different value in, so we can bump that over to 300 pixels. If I bump it to 100 pixels, you'll see that the two are now overlapping. So its position, when we say relative, it's now positioning relative to the previous element that's been positioned. So not 100 pixels after the previous element, 100 pixels from where the previous position has happened, which was at 0, 0. Well, actually, not at 0, because we can see the margins aren't defaulted out because we have about a 10 pixel gap at the left and top. The world gets more fun when we start using absolute positioning. Absolute positioning means the element is no longer part of the document flow. The element is now being absolutely positioned on screen. So as that element is being positioned, we're able to specify top right, left, or top right, bottom left properties. And in doing so, we can put elements all over on screen. So in this example, we have our 4 boxes, and each one is being sent to a different corner of the screen. Looking at the style, we will see the blue box is sent to 0, 0. And we can see how each one of these, so it's 0 top, 0 left. Box 2 is at 0 top, 0 right. By saying 0 right, we're able to then make it stick to the right-hand margin. So wherever that right margin is, that element is going to stick to it. So in a modified version of our document from before, margin and padding are not set to 0 yet. The elements are jammed right up into the corners of the screen because their positioning information is telling them to move to those locations. So by setting the positions of each of the boxes, it jams them into the relative corners. I can also see that while my HTML gets a background, because the body effectively has no content left inside of it, the body is now existing up in this little collapsed box. So the body does not fill my contents at the moment. But we are able to now position these on screen, and we can position them absolutely. That is really the power of positioning. So the divs have a position of absolute applied to them. So once things are positioned absolutely, it's also possible to add additional elements on screen that will be relative to those options. So it's actually possible to position elements inside of elements using absolute positioning. So when we look at inside every one of these divs, there's an extra div with a class of orange attached to it. Now if I look at the styles, we will see that the position for that orange box is now going to be at 39% of its parent element. So it's being positioned relative to its parent, but absolutely, which is misusing all of the correct terms or the CSS terms, but using normal language correctly, which makes it extra confusing. With the absolute and absolute options, my colored paragraphs, by positioning them absolutely and giving them fixed pixel dimensions, they are now offsetting themselves from the coordinates of their parent element being the div, which has been positioned absolutely. So when we start attempting to create complex layouts, we're going to start trying to figure out how to position and lay the elements out on screen. We will have to then take all of those same elements and figure out how to fit them into semantic markup and then write the CSS to hook onto that semantic markup and generate the layout design that we have created at the beginning. The final position property that we will be looking at is fixed. Now, fixed takes an element, fixes it on screen, and that element is no longer going to scroll when the rest of the document moves. And a common place that we see that may be inside a footer element. So if I have a long web page, we fixed the footer on the bottom so it's always visible. The text will then scroll behind that element. That item has not only been absolutely positioned on screen, it's not going to move because it's positioned relative to the window or viewport and will not budge within that structure. There are some websites that have this and it feels like a good solution. There are other websites that have it that when you are scrolling down to look at more content, the top navigation and masthead disappear, and when you scroll back up, it reappears because it's fixed. It just hides itself when you are scrolling down the page so you can see more of what's on screen. I'm of a mixed opinion of whether I think that's a good design idea or not. For fixed is not just for a footer or for a masthead navigation, but for background elements. So to put design elements or pictures in your background, and then you set their property in the CSS to be fixed, and in doing so you have a fixed background that your content scrolls on top of, and it can, with the right content and the right images, be an aesthetically solid choice.